Welcome to the Practicing Drummer podcast. My name's Craig, and before we get started, I just want to send a big thank you to Bart over at the Drum History podcast. Between helping me pick out gear and his advice about audio editing, he's been so incredibly helpful. So anything that you like about the sound of the podcast, you can thank Bart. Anything you don't like, just blame me. I'm learning as I go. Bart, if you're listening, thanks again. You're awesome. In this episode, I'm bringing you a conversation I had with drummer Brad Webb in April of 2023. Brad's a drummer from Louisiana, and after studying classical percussion for most of his life, he switched his focus to drum set. He's living up in Boston now, and it was really great catching up with him and learning a little bit more about his development as a player. You can check the show notes for links to some of the things we talked about in the episode, and with that, let's get right to it. When did I see you play? I think it was 2017 when the extended trio was up here playing at the Black Dog in St. Paul, Minnesota. Yeah. And man, that gig really stuck with me because it was, just about a year after I got back into playing the drums seriously after a really long break. So I was a little bit out of the game and I was checking out new players, and somehow you were on my radar, and then I saw this ad. So we came and saw you and I was just blown away.
Oh, dude, thank you, man.
You were great to talk to. And, dude. Oscar and Matt. So it was so cool.
I remember two things from that gig. One, I remember you asked about my ride cymbal specifically.
Oh, yeah, right.
Because you were like, is that the same one from the video? And it was, because I had like a yellow piece of duct tape on it. I don't have that cymbal anymore, by the way.
Did you sell it or?
Actually, no, I think I just gave it away.
Oh, wow.
I bought that cymbal from the guy that makes my drumsticks in Lafayette, Louisiana for like $20. It was like a Kingston from Taiwan. It wasn't anything of note. It was just weird and funky. It didn't sound like any other cymbal, and it was exactly why I wanted it.
Was that the one that you said you found and it was all dirty and you had to clean up and it had been sitting outside for a long time?
Yep, it was leaning up against this guy Frank Kinsel makes my drumsticks.
Yeah, LA Backbeat.
Yeah, man, Frank's the best.
Yep.
But it was outside of his mom's shed for like, I don't know, however long. And he was like, "Oh, dude, just take it." And I think my dad was with me because he brought me to go pick up sticks when I was in town. And, cool. And my dad just had $20 and was like, "Here, Frank, take that." And he was like, "All right, whatever."
Oh, nice. So what are you using now? I think I've seen some more recent videos where you still have cymbals that are kind of beat up or...
All my cymbals are pretty much cracked and busted in some shape or form. But my new ride cymbal is Zildjian K Custom Extra Dry.
Oh, cool. Okay.
But it had, I bought it for like $125 because it was broken. Yeah. So I cut the cracks out and it kind of has the similar vibe. It's super dead. It has this weird decay to it. Not a lot of crazy overtones. Yeah, it's exactly what I want in cymbals.
Yeah, your cymbals and drums always sound good too. One thing I wanted to ask you about before we get off on other topics is I think I saw a video of you online playing a Kelvin and Hobbs kit.
Oh yeah, dude.
I'll post a link in the show notes too so people can see it.
So I made that kit. I wrapped it myself in my childhood Calvin and Hobbs. Can we curse? Is this like
why not?
No?
Yeah.
Okay. I fucking love Calvin and Hobbs, man. Like I seriously love Calvin and Hobbs. Bill Watterson to me is like the epitome of so much that is cool about an artist. I love the fact that he did Calvin and Hobbs and then just stopped at like the height. He could have got it. I don't know what syndication is for comic strips in like the New York Times, but he was offered a decent amount to just keep it going. And as an artist, he just said, "No, I've said everything I need to say. Calvin has no more adventures. Like it's done." And he just stopped.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
I have like so much respect for like an artist that like has an opportunity to do that. And it's just like, no, like I made my statement in this medium. Yeah. So I put together all these drums. I cut like a 16-inch floor tom into a bass drum, stripped it, unwrapped everything, got a bunch of hardware from some random shells, and I decoupaged. I cut up my childhood Calvin and Hobbes book and I decoupaged the kit. So I
Oh,
have this Calvin
wow.
and Hobbes kit.
So you still
Yeah.
have it?
Oh, absolutely. It's with me
Prized
up here.
possession, right?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So you brought it up to Boston area with you?
Yeah, yeah, that's the kit that I brought to Boston. So I have like a bot kit size, so like 16 kick, 12-inch floor, 12-inch rack, 13-inch floor, and then I also wrapped a 20-inch bass drum and a 16-inch floor tom. So I have like a multi-use kit, all wrapped in Calvin and Hobbes, man.
Oh, super cool. Super cool. Yeah, thanks
Yeah,
for thanks for telling me about that. Um, so we just mentioned that you moved up to Boston, but I want to talk about New Orleans for a little bit
yeah, for
before
sure,
we get to that, because I mean, you played with, I mean, you still play with the extended trio, and
for sure.
now there's the new record with Brad Walker.
Yeah,
Extended trio, for anybody that doesn't know, you have to check them out. Spotify, YouTube. Again, I'll put some links in the show notes. Your style personally and sound is so unique, but the group is amazing too. I mean, Matt Booth is a wonderful bass player, and Oscar Rosignoli on
mm-hmm.
piano, amazing. And he plays all over New Orleans. I've seen him with various groups, playing with Herlin Riley, Alexi
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Marti, and then to, the trio with you guys is really special.
Man, thank you so much.
So when you recently did the record, you guys have a few trio records out,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but then you have the new one with Brad
Yeah.
Walker, right, playing saxophone added there too. What was that process like? Was it a really natural fit, or did you all have to adjust your kind of collaboration style? Or can you tell me a little bit more about going from a trio to adding a fourth voice?
Yeah. Um, so we want that to be a project. We want to play as a quartet more, but extended's not a quartet. Like
Right,
if
right.
we keep doing it, it'll be this other thing. Um, extended is extended. It's the three of us. There's no substitutions. If we have to do a gig and one of the three of us can't be there, we just don't call it extended. Period. With Brad, that was we played our first gig the week that COVID shut down everything. Our first gig as a quartet, Brad had a gig and he wanted to book us basically. Like he'd done a project or a show at the same venue with another group, and and he said this before, so these are his words. He very selfishly was like, "You guys are awesome. I want to play with you in that configuration." That's how the first gigs happened. But the reason why it kind of works is because we've all known each other. The nepotism between the four of us is kind of insane, really. Like Brad's on my first record as a leader.
Yeah, right. Making faces. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And so I've known Brad. He was one of the first people I met when I moved to New Orleans. Brad has known Oscar since when Oscar was at LSU in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So they've known each other even longer than me and Brad. Brad and Matt know each other from playing a lot of funk music with John Grow in New Orleans. So there's these duos and connections between the four of us that are separate than the thing that actually like put us in the same room together. So we've done some extended gigs with other people before where we've had a fourth member, and all those people have been amazing. They're great friends of ours. They're amazing musicians, but I think it's the relationships that we have with each other that really make that project work. It's what makes extended so special, in my opinion. Oscar is a true X factor. I mean, the dude is one of the most amazing musicians I've ever met. Matt is one of the most complete musicians I've ever met. He knows so much music and can reference anything and do it in a way that's not contrived, do it in a way that's completely his voice. I'd like to think I fit somewhere in the mix, but it's the relationships that make these things work. It's my relationship with Oscar, my relationship with Matt, Matt's relationship with Oscar. We allow those our true personal selves, and we completely trust each other. And the relationships that we've had with Brad, once again, mine with Brad in my group, Matt with Brad playing other music, Oscar and Brad, all those different relationships, I think, come out in the music whenever these little duos and trios pop out in the music that we play. It it just makes sense. It feels like we're brothers, true brothers,
Yeah, and
creating music
it
together.
sounds that way too. You
Yeah,
hear so much trust with you
yeah,
guys,
yeah,
and the conversation is there the whole time too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's another project I wanted to talk to you about too that I didn't really know too much about until recently when I was researching for this interview was Basher,
Yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
I've learned recently that you lived next door to Byron Asher
Hmm.
for several years and
Yep.
have several projects together. And there was one really cool video I saw, and really interesting thing that I wouldn't mind hearing you talk about a little bit is there's two drummers in that group.
There's two drummers in that band. Yeah.
Right. And there's a really cool video of you all playing, I think, at the stadium where the
Oh yeah,
Pelicans
yeah, yeah.
play.
We
And there's a,
played the halftime show at an NBA game.
yes, yes. And you're right there on the Pelicans logo, center
Yeah,
court,
yeah.
drum sets facing each other.
It's really funny. All five of us. So it's Byron Asher's band, Basher. And that's Aurora Nealand on alto sax, Daniel Meineke on Euro rack synthesizer. I don't know. That guy's insane. I like think about what his life is like at home, trying to figure out how to work all those keyboards and stuff. I don't get it. And the other drummer is actually a buddy of mine from Lafayette, Louisiana, Zach Ray.
Oh, yeah.
And Zach is a composer. There was another drummer in this band, Paul Thibodeau. Paul moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico with his family.
Oh, yeah. I
Yeah,
met him when I was in New Orleans
yeah,
in
dude.
2018. I think I saw him at Snug Harbor playing with Dave Stryker.
Yep, yep, yep. So,
Yeah, great guy.
dude, Paul's amazing. Paul's one of my heroes. I met him when I moved to New Orleans within like the first week, and he's just he's the best, man.
Yes.
Paul's amazing. I love Paul. Paul, if you're out there, I love you, man. And that worked really great. Like I didn't really tolerate playing double drums with very many people. So when Paul moved, Zach was really the only person that I wanted to play with. He's a composer. We know each other. We have a lot of respect for one another. And if you're gonna play double drums in a band, you kind of have to have that.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's kind of numero uno as far as I'm concerned.
So are you still affiliated with that band as well?
Yeah, yeah.
We touched on this a little bit. You're back in Boston.
Hmm.
How long have you been up there?
Moved here in January.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah,
So you
it's
got a
just a
few
couple months.
months.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're getting settled in. Are you playing up there at all yet?
Not just yet. Going about like just meeting people, seeing shows. There's a lot less shows that happen here than New Orleans, although that's kind of true
Oh yeah,
for
New Orleans.
pretty much any
Yes, yes.
city, except maybe New York.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just been a little bit slow moving and been more enjoying the other reason why I moved here, which is just for activities. I've been skating, been surfing, gone snowboarding a couple times, shopping for a mountain bike so I could go do that too.
Oh, nice,
Yeah.
nice. And do you have a spot to practice up there?
Not permanently. I have a couple friends of mine that I went to college with that I still have access to some space. But I'm about to teach privately at one of my old teachers' after school music program that I'll have access to a space. So
Oh,
yeah,
cool. Okay, cool.
it's funny that that the practicing drummer is the name of your thing and talking about it because I had a conversation with my old teacher over drinks the other night about what practice looks like the older we get, which I'm sure we could possibly get into in a bit.
Let's get right into it. So what I want to ask you about is growing up. Part of the reason I wanted to talk to you
Mhm.
is because your story's kind of unique. You started out, playing snare drum, mallets,
Mhm. Mhm.
being more into classical percussion, and then, around the time you were in college, maybe started thinking more about switching to drum set more seriously.
Mhm.
And you did play drum set growing up as well, right?
Yeah, yeah. I played drum set a bit more once I got into high school. One of my oldest compatriots, Trey Boudreau, Trey and I have had almost every musical experience together.
Bass
Um,
player, yeah.
Bass player, yeah, he's on my first record as well. Um, he and I started playing in a funk band in high school, classic, played out of our buddy's pool house. You know what I mean? Can't get any more like pure than that. You know what I mean? But yeah, so there was a little bit back and forth between like my classical studies, if you will, and like taking drum set lessons and stuff like that.
What was your lesson situation like when you were growing up? Were you mostly snare drum lessons early on, or was it a pretty even mix? Or can you talk about that a little bit and what kind of stuff you were studying and practicing?
Oh man, it if I thought about it a little bit harder, I could kind of figure out exactly what I was studying. But my entire from maybe early middle school all the way through high school was just two different teachers. And I kind of, the same way I think about the way that I play music with people, the way that those lessons probably frames how I see creating and interacting with other people. Um, what I mean by that is that my first teacher was this guy, Brian Nelson. I studied with him for 4 years, all the way through middle school. And we would sometimes study timpani, sometimes study snare drum. Once again, if I think about it more, there was probably way more organization to it. And we had some lessons where we just went on a walk and he told me about like playing a gig and feeling playing music that made people want to dance and then thinking about creating and interpreting music, and we would just walk and talk. I was in
Oh yeah, those
sixth
some
grade.
of those. Oh really,
I
that
was
young?
yeah, I was
Wow.
13, 14 years old, and he's talking to me about how, we had conversations about spirituality and God and, what to call this thing and why does this feel like that? Relationships, like, you know, talking about just how to communicate with people and why sometimes words make sense and why sometimes drums make sense. 13, 14, 15 years old, and we were having these conversations and walks. So, like, whether it was through snare drum or mallets or any of that stuff, I think whatever I was kind of active in that time, that's what we were studying. But the thing I take away from those lessons more is communication and relationships and feeling and purpose in music making.
Yeah, that's such a big part of the student teacher relationship when it's good that
Hmm.
gets overlooked so much. So many people are thinking about, oh, what books and what
Yeah,
exercises.
yeah.
But when you get a teacher that can really talk and share
Hmm.
experiences that you can absorb at that age, it's so important.
Oh, yeah. And what's crazy to me now is like he was a college student at the time. I mean, I see him even today the same I saw him back then as this grown man who had life
Yeah.
figured out. And like, you
At
know,
18,
yeah, he was
19,
a
right?
20-year-old, junior at UL and Lafayette at the time. And after I studied with Brian, the professor at the university was this guy, Jeff Prospery. Jeff is now in the Hellcats. He's in the Hall of Fame at DCI. He literally has written the book on judging drum corps and DCI. Like that's where his career has been. Um,
Oh, wow. So did you get pretty deep into that?
I did, yeah. I marched drum corps for 2 years. As a mallet player, I did marimba one summer when I was 15, and then the second summer I marched timpani. I didn't march timpani, but I was, but for drum corps purposes, we all marched. But I was in
Yeah.
the pit both years. Yeah,
And that's a whole different ball
that
game,
is
right?
the
Rehearsals and
that
choreography
that is a
and
whole different world. You live on a bus for an entire summer. I played mallets and timpani 8, 10 hours a day for a summer, getting super tan. That was pretty much it.
let's step back just a minute. So when you were studying with Brian,
Hmm.
and you were young, were you like a pretty good practicer or an obsessed practicer? Or what was your relationship to? Because there is a part of it where you just want to and you're doing it all the time, but then there's also the material you're trying to learn and your
Yeah,
teacher is trying to guide you a little
yeah.
bit. Were you how were you with that?
I've always been pretty self motivated, and I've always had like pretty good self discipline. I'm the youngest of three, so I watched my brother and sister make a fair amount of mistakes, as any youngest, hopefully, and most of them do. So I was kind of aware and saw different ways of going about stuff. And yeah, I was fine locking myself in a room and whacking away on a snare drum for 4 hours every night. I don't know how my parents dealt with it. I truly don't. Um, but yeah, practicing hours every day wasn't that big of a deal for me. And, uh, I remember, Brian, one of the things we did was like meditative paradiddles. He is starting to work on it. This great drummer out of New Orleans, Ricky Sebastian.
Oh yeah.
Brian had taken some lessons with Ricky, and it was one thing he had him do. And so there was a period where I would wake up before school and I would do 30-minute meditative paradiddles.
So what was that like? You mean just straight paradiddles, or was there a rhythmic aspect to it?
Paradiddles at just like a moderate tempo that wasn't too fast, not too slow, that kind of thing. And it was literally just get to a point where you don't really notice that there's sticks in your hands, and that like you almost kind of want to zone out. Like you want your thoughts to be so clear that you don't recognize what it is you're doing, and yet the met has completely disappeared because you're just in perfect time with yourself. because the sticks that stopped mattering weeks ago.
Wow, and you had the discipline to do that at that age.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Is that something you still do? Or have you ever gone back to that when you've
Uh,
kind of gotten into a rut or
it
anything?
specifically that. Like there's these go-tos, like these kind of exercises that I don't have to think about whenever I feel like I don't, you know, now that I'm older, it's like you go through these back and forth things of like, do I even want to do this anymore? What does this mean? You look at a pair of sticks and you're just like, I don't know who you are, kind of thing. And yet there's these go-tos that I can sit down and whack away on a pad, and all of a sudden things start to like feel better and thoughts start to get clearer and stuff. Probably the same way that like swimming laps or going on a long run. But for me, it's like sitting down with the pad and going through these things that have felt so good to me for since I was 10 years old.
Well, yeah, it brings you back to when you were young and kind of the time of your life where you were probably very excited about
Yeah.
playing and practicing.
Yeah.
And then were you also practicing drum set a lot when you were in your teen years, or were you just playing with friends
No, that
and kind of working it out
I
that
was
way?
where drum set came from that. Just playing. Even in college. I mean, by the time I went to the conservatory specifically because I wanted to be a classical musician.
Yeah, Boston
Yeah,
Conservatory.
that
Yeah,
was my
yeah.
focus. That's what I wanted. I probably had spent more money on tambourines than most people do on cymbals at that time. I mean, it's like that was the world that we existed in. Even then, I wasn't practicing drum set. That came
Hmm.
into my second or third year in Boston when it was just I was playing every time I'd come home for the summer, I would play gigs with my friends, and we were starting to think about improvisation more. And I was starting to
Mm.
think about the drum set the same way that I thought about snare drum and marimba and timpani in a more like serious, creative manner of like, this is an instrument that has a voice that I could speak through, kind of thing.
When you would go back to school then after having those kind of
Mm-hmm.
epiphanies, how did that mesh with the conservatory, the demands of a conservatory education and kind of being pulled in this other direction? And then I know like Berkeley's close, and I think I remember hearing in an interview you even went over to Berkeley and studied with some of the teachers there. And could you just talk a little bit about that transition or any of the struggles around that? And then I specifically want to ask you about when you started getting serious about practice and talking to Terry
Mm-hmm.
Lynn
Mm-hmm.
and Ralph Peterson over at Berkeley.
Yeah. The Pro Arts Consortium in Boston allows like kids from different schools to take electives at other schools, kind of thing.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
every semester that I was at the conservatory, I took classes at Berkeley. So I took brush techniques. I took jazz rep with Ralph. That's how I met Ralph. I took funk repertoire with Kenwood Denard. Um, Even took a couple lessons with him. And so I took classes kind of every semester, and that was my exposure to all of that. Um, some of that also, I mean, a lot of that came from my self discipline as well, which I obviously I had a history of that just growing up. I wrestled in high school, which kind of sealed the deal as far as like being confident and comfortable and that drive and mental focus and like being alone and doing something that might be like a bit odd, such as waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning to like hit a pad for an hour or go on a run, or like most wrestlers, if any wrestlers out there listen to this, it's like, the self-sacrifice of like, just once you get out of practice, you go on a run, you're cutting weight, you're not eating, that kind of lifelong day in and day out, whether you're at practice or not, you live the life of this activity you've chosen. And I very much took that into music. Um, I, I don't think there was a coincidence that like my audition at the conservatory was a week after the state wrestling tournament. I was in that mindset. I was in that like sacrifice a lot for this thing, and it's not something that you do now and then I'll think about later. It was my life, and I thought my thought process and mentality was very much in support and in line with that. So yeah, so like I get to the conservatory and there was these other things and this I could take classes at Berkeley, but I had to reach out to it. I could take lessons with teachers, but I had to do that and find time for it. that makes it sound all like nice and organized, but I was still an 18-year-old kid trying to figure things out. So it didn't always manifest in the clearest way possible. Like I got kicked out of a lesson with Nancy because I wasn't prepared. Nancy Zeltzman, who's the chair at Boston Conservatory, excellent world-renowned marimba soloist. It didn't always come out in the best way, and I didn't always have the clearest way of explaining and talking about the things I was feeling and what I wanted to do, musically speaking. I even wrote a paper in college called Classical versus Jazz, which like now I look at that and I'm just like, God, like how naive. But at the same time, I didn't think that there was this possibility that music was as connected and that creating it was as, you're 18 years old. I mean, you're being told that this is that and this is that.
Yeah,
Everything's
and
black and white.
and it's not verses.
Yeah.
And didn't your teacher even make a correction of the title and left the rest of the paper
he
alone?
just
Yeah.
scratched out verses and just wrote and then was basically like, cool. Like, I'm glad you felt comfortable to like express yourself. Now let's hopefully grow and realize that like a lot of the things you expressed were just, there's more information for you to gain here that might, if you were to write that paper a year later or 5 years later or 10 years later, or now as a 35-year-old, the content would be very different. The understanding and the perspective would be very different. Hopefully, I sincerely hope
Oh,
my
yeah.
35-year-old self has a different perspective on music than my 18-year-old self did.
So did you start playing with people in Boston? Did you start playing jazz with people, going to Berkeley jams or seeking out, like sitting in at any of the venues in town? I know the other thing, you worked at the Regatta
Yeah,
Bar,
yeah.
and I want to talk about that too. But yeah, were you playing much in town?
No, kind of like going back to like when you were talking about, so when did I start to play and stuff in college, man? I was very conscious about how I sounded. I wasn't a dedicated drum set player, and so I felt very inadequate. So anytime I would interact with Berkeley students, I didn't feel good enough straight up to play. I don't know if I was, but just thinking about it then, I felt very inadequate, even thinking about myself as a drum set player in Boston at that time.
Oh, I think that's a very common
Yeah,
feeling at
yeah.
that age.
Even when I graduated and I left and moved to New Orleans, it wasn't because I had a footing or anything. I left Boston not engaging with the jazz world as a player or the
Hmm.
improvisational world as a player at all.
Did you feel like you grew as a drum set player a lot while you were in Boston? Because were you also practicing drum
Yeah,
set or?
big time. I did. Yeah, I actually like acquired some of my cymbals. I don't know if I should even say this because I might get me in. I don't know.
Or I can cut it if you change your mind.
I mean, I acquired some of my cymbals from like a trash can at the conservatory. I put
Oh,
together a
wow.
drum set of like busted up gear because every time I would practice, somebody would steal something for like an ensemble or orchestra rehearsal. So I just set
Mm.
up this busted up kit with like a bass drum with no back head, just so I could practice. And at the time, I like didn't even really know what I was practicing. I treated it like I would any other classical instrument, which was very kind of like, and kind of from the drum corps, like drumline era of just like kind of a grid kind of thing. And like, all right, I'm going to work out my left foot, but I'm going to go through all the different permutations and a triplet bass
Hmm.
thing and a 16th note bass thing. And I just kind of,
And were you working out of books or
um, a bit.
were you already pretty good at inventing exercises for yourself?
No,
Or
I basically out of just Ted Reed syncopation, which I still work out of today,
yeah.
and stick control, and just coming up with ways of using it in this configuration. So like, all the different ways you could use Ted Reed syncopation. Like I'm going to do this pattern with my right hand, right foot and left foot, and I'm going to read the material with my left hand. Then I'm going to go through all that and I'm going to read it with my left foot. And every time there's an eighth note, I'm going to do this. And every time there's a quarter note, I'm going to do that. And just kind of coming up with endless possibilities to use the same 8 pages of Ted Reed syncopation,
Yeah.
which I still do today whenever I'm like, again, in a bit of a rut. I can just kind of go through and I start to move all my limbs and certain things. And it's like, ooh, you know what? My left foot doesn't feel as whatever. All right, now I'm going to work on that today.
So you mentioned a couple minutes ago you didn't even really know what you were practicing and you felt like you were just going through
Hmm.
sort of a grid or a methodology. Do you remember when you got to the point where you felt like you knew why you were practicing and had goals that were greater than practicing exercises?
Yeah. The summer, I stayed in Boston the summer between my junior and senior year. Um, the summer before that, I was back in my hometown of Lafayette, and there was a jam session at a pizza bar called Bisbano's, which doesn't exist anymore.
Hmm.
Um, and my old mentor is the drummer Frank Kinsel, who makes my drumsticks, was in a trio called Modern Jazz Movement. The sax player is still in town, and the bass player is now one of my oldest and dearest friends, Dion Pierre, who I stay with when I go back to New Orleans now.
Oh, cool.
And there was that summer where Trey and I were going to the jam session to see these guys play because to us they were the epitome of creation. They were the epitome. They were like the baddest dudes in town. The way they improvised as a trio was the way we wanted to improvise. The relationship they had as people was the relationship we wanted to have with each other. Trey and I specifically saw ourselves as a rhythm section union the way Dion and Frank did. Um, and I remember specifically we would go to these jams and Dion was like, all right, pick 2 tunes and come back next week and learn them. And so, all right, all right, what 2 tunes you want to play? And I call the 2 tunes that I learned. And that gave me purpose behind specifically drum set. That was kind of the first time that it was like not just technical, not just make your right hand
Yeah.
do this and your left hand do that, but there was now a concept. It was the first conceptual thing I had thought about on the drum set. And it was kind of hard
Yeah,
from there,
so
man.
do you remember some of those early tunes that you kind of plucked out and thought like, okay, I could do these, and then what was your process like for kind of getting out of the exercises and into, was it just playing with the records or?
Not so much playing with the records, more so just like trying to play the melody between just play the melody in my hand. Oleo was the first tune, man. I love that tune today because of that very reason. And it was just like coming up with different ways of clearly playing that melody. And then, you know, that next year, that next semester, when I go back, I take jazz rep with Ralph Peterson. And that's exactly what Ralph talked about. Basically, it was like that whole class was just like, here's 40 tunes that I think every jazz drummer should learn. And you need to play it in what Ralph called first position, which is like swing pattern in your right hand, 2 and 4 in your left hand,
Or left
and
foot?
the melody, but and
Yeah.
and and the melody between your bass drum and your snare, your right foot and your left hand. He called that like first position. It's like don't move around, don't do anything else. If you can clearly state a melody so much that I can know what
Mm.
tune you're playing, just between your bass drum and snare drum, then you're on your way to learning that tune.
Were you
Yeah.
doing that? Was that like kind of in front of a whole class, or was that private lessons with Ralph? Or
Nah, that was a class. Yeah, so there'd be 6 drum set players attempting to do the same thing, and none of us sounded really
yeah,
good at the time. So, yeah, God bless Ralph, man. I miss
yeah,
that guy.
I know, he's amazing. I've met him just a couple
Yeah.
times. Can we talk? I do want to talk about your time working at the Regatta Bar, even though you weren't, you weren't working as a
Hmm.
drummer at the Regatta Bar. Do you remember any shows that made an impact on you? Or, I mean, probably everyone, but what was that like? I've always wondered that's like working at a jazz club, and if you actually can take the time and attention to absorb what's going on.
Oh man, to me that was just as much college as the conservatory was. I worked there on average at that time. We were booked by Blue Note. Regatta Bar was booked by
Oh,
Blue Note at the
okay.
time. So all the Blue Note artists would come to the Regatta Bar, and all the Concord artists would go to Scullers uh, down the street. And I would get there early to wipe tables and set everything up, but that would also mean I was there during sound check. And me and the sound guy got to be really good friends, so he would let me at the end of the night before he packed everything up, he would let me go and like touch the kit basically. Not play it. I would literally just go and like look at it and like tap the drums just to see like, all right, tonight it was Eric Harland with Dave Holland's quintet. How did he set up his drums and how did he tune these up? And then the next night it would be Francesco Mela on the same kit, but the drum sounded totally different. And then it would be Dave King with the Bad Plus, and then it would be uh oh man, who's Nate Smith would come in I mean, it was who Daphnis Prieto when he was in his 20s and he just started playing with Michelle Camilo, all playing the same kit. And I learned so much about tuning drums at the time, but even more so, I learned so much about the ergonomics of the kit. Like Jonathan Blake sits up super high and his kit's
Yeah.
super flat. Eric Harlan sits a different way and his cymbals are a little bit higher. What about the architecture of the kit makes us play different? It's a very physical instrument. So like to think that the way it's set up wouldn't affect the way that we play it and the sounds that we make is just very naive. And that was night after night. I would see these guys play with the baddest in the world, and the kit would sound different and look different, but it was the same kit. So I knew at that time that it's like, man, having dope gear is good, and I have a nice Gretsch drum set that I really cherish. But I also play this Calvin and Hobbes wrapped shell pack that I'm pretty sure the bass drum is a Tama something or other, and I don't even know. And the snare drum is this like 6 lug weird thing, but the way it's set up and the way that I tune it, all those things have a big influence on how you can make your sound on
Well,
this
yeah, and your
instrument.
touch too. I mean, that's something I wanted to get into as well. You have you watch video, or I watch videos of you play online, and I've seen you play live too, which was wonderful. But you have a really unique approach to the drum set and the cymbals. Like a lot of times you're kind of approaching the cymbal from the side, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Uh-huh.
you choke up on the sticks a little bit more than it seems like some drummers do. Is that, are those things that came from your time with classical percussion or snare drum?
Definitely. I mean that was classical to the max. Is like the very nuanced um like what happens if you put a little bit of pressure on your second finger? What happens if you put pressure on your first knuckle of your second finger? What happens if you open up the gap between your thumb and your pointer? All those very nuanced details which in classical music you kind of need, especially when you're making so many different sounds on just a snare drum, or you're going from a snare drum to a wood block or whatever crazy contemporary piece that you're working on that week. And I took that straight to the kit.
And is
um,
that something you're still conscious of when you play, or is that just intuitive to you now?
it's pretty intuitive now. I am aware of it, especially the older I get and the more that I'm kind of rethinking practice and the mechanics and like how much do I need to practice to maintain the dexterity and the speed and the clarity that I still want when I play drums without having to lock myself in a room for 8 hours a day like I did when I was
Yeah.
18. I don't need to do that now. I'm 35. I got some things figured
Yeah.
out. I don't have everything figured out, but I got some things. So like thinking about that in terms of what I need to do to be able to execute and play the way that I want to
Yeah,
play.
and that kind of leads me to the next thing I wanted to ask you about is you do have a very unique sound and vocabulary on the drums. So, who are some of your influences, or what were you listening to when you started to really decide you wanted to get your drum set playing together?
I mean, no surprise to you in Minnesota, man, but Dave King is the guy that I probably identify with
Okay,
the
yeah, yeah,
most.
that's interesting. I
You know,
kind of thought that.
actually, one of the things I appreciate so much is when I met you at the Black Dog, the Dave King trio was playing that same night, and you came and saw us play, and you actually told me that. I
Oh
was like,
yeah.
oh man, like we mentioned something about Dave King, and you were like, yeah, I thought about going to see that, but he plays a lot around here, and you guys are from New Orleans, and I don't think I expressed it at the time, but I was like so incredibly excited and flattered that you would not see Dave King and come see me because I wanted to not see me and go see Dave King that night.
Yeah, it's always hard when two great players are playing on the same night. But it's just like you said, like you were in town one night. Well, what was I going to do? I had to go see you. I had a similar experience in New York, maybe 6, 7 months ago, where I went to see Billy Drummond play at Smalls, and then, of course, the same night at Mesro, Al Foster was playing.
Oh my
Right.
god,
And Sophie's choice for me because I'm a big Billy Drummond
yeah.
fan. And so thankfully at those venues, they do two sets. So it was like, okay, I'll go see Billy, then I'll go
Oh, did
see
you
Al. Yeah,
split it?
yeah. So could make it
Nice,
work. So
nice. Dave's been someone I've been listening to for a long time as an improviser. I mean, you know, it's like even in his interviews, he's improvising, he's riffing, he's joking. The idea that you could just constantly create, and that maybe there's this idea that you could create better on drums if you practice creating away from the
Mm.
drums. Um, I don't know if Dave thinks about that, but that's what I've gotten from seeing the way he interacts with his bandmates. In very limited, I've not spent any time with him or anything. It's like I see him in interviews and I see him on and off of the bandstand the few times I've seen him play. And that idea of like you can practice being an improviser even away from your instrument, and like seeing him just be a creator. He's hilarious in interviews. He's constantly like finding his way around the form of the interview, and I
Oh, and
love
his
that about
stage
him.
banter is second to none as well.
It's
Yeah, it really
incredible,
is.
man. Yeah, I saw the new quartet played here in Boston about a month
Oh,
ago.
really?
I was able to go see him play. Yeah, it
Oh,
was
cool.
awesome. I saw them. I saw the new quartet last summer in New York as well. It was the first time seeing the new configuration. I was totally
Oh, yeah,
smitten.
yeah,
Totally
yeah.
smitten.
So you listen to Bad Plus a lot. Were you listening to a lot of traditional jazz as well, or were you drawn more to the modern?
I was always drawn more to the modern, probably more so because I never really studied jazz. Even still today, like I never had that moment of studying jazz. What got me into it was listening to modern creators, and especially coming through classical music and modern classical music and contemporary art music that was going on in Boston at the time. That was the world that I was drawn to mostly. Is like current creators doing some weird, funky new shit
Yeah,
kind
which
of
is
thing.
unique, especially you spent so much time in New Orleans, right? You think of guys
Mm,
having a really deep connection to the tradition down there.
yeah.
Did you ever seek out Herlin or Shannon Powell or Johnny Vodakovich or any of the guys down there to study with?
I
Or
sought out Johnny, but I would say even Johnny's probably more on the modern sensibilities of playing. I I've had to I had to convince myself time and time again to listen to like old records. You know, like I still don't consider myself to be a very swinging cat. I get a little bit self conscious sometimes when I have to play just like straight down the pipe, kind of a swing gig. Although I feel more and more confident with it the more I do it. But I mean, I'm thinking about a gig right now that Matt Booth and I did at this place in New Orleans called
oh
Bamboula's,
yeah.
and halfway through the second set, I started swinging, like for real swinging, and Matt was playing, and he just looked over and gave me this like, whoa. Yeah. And then at the set break, he was like, dude, that was it. That felt good. That was what, maybe last, I was maybe 34, 33, 34. And for the first time, I felt like I truly swung. You know, maybe that's not true. Maybe I've swung in the past, but that was a moment where I was aware of it, and I could feel it and I could sense it and I had control
Oh
over it.
yeah. And is that something that did that light anything inside of you? Where you want to explore that more, or?
No, not really.
Yeah, and that's cool too. I mean, there's
It
definitely
just,
something to be said.
yeah.
I mean, and that's one thing I admire about you too, is you do have such a strong voice, and you seem to follow music and get into projects that honor what you not only have to offer but want to offer.
Oh man, yeah. Thank you. That's really cool. I don't know if that's what I think now I'm a bit more aware of that. Obviously, it's like I like the people I create with. You know, like-minded creators is what I call them. You know, Matt, Oscar, Trey, Byron. It's why I've sought out those people, is because it gives me the opportunity to be the most myself. You know, and I like original projects as well. Not necessarily so much like I have a deep appreciation for traditional music and like the bebop era and swing, even though I very stubbornly fought against it, where every time somebody would be like, yeah, well, if you haven't checked out Philly Joe, then you can't really swing. And it's just like, guess who I'm not going to check out ever? You know, and I very stubbornly had these moments of just like, everyone else was listening to this. Well, guess what? I'm not listening to that just because you said so.
So here's something I wanted to ask you about. You said you do have a practice spot up there. Do you practice on a pad at home? Um,
I do.
yeah,
Yeah.
what's your favorite practice pad?
Oh, I think I have the same rear feel I've had since I was 14 years old, man.
Oh, okay, okay. I was wondering if some of
Yeah.
the marching guys really like those.
I never really got into any of that.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
And what kind of things are you
Um,
working on when you break out the pad? Just
um,
maintenance or and working on new
some,
stuff?
no, not much new stuff at the moment. Although, like, there's like I noticed a few years back I do this weird like push pull thing with my right hand, especially when I swing and play diddles. And I noticed I didn't do it in my left hand, so I was just like trying to teach my left hand how to do it, and just like going back through this process of like figuring it out.
Because you play matched, yeah?
Yeah, I play
Yeah.
match, and every now and then I'll play traditional grip, but mostly it's match grip. Aside that, like the pad stuff is more maintenance, variations of paradiddles. I'll like watch soccer highlights or watch surf movies, and I'll just like play on the pad, go through things that I don't really necessarily need to like think about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
One of my teachers in college told me Itzhak Perlman used to just like practice his scales while watching baseball. And so that's why I justify watching like soccer and surf movies when I practice now
Oh
sometimes.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I do that a lot too.
At least definitely the maintenance kind of
Yep,
stuff.
yep.
But as far as conceptual, there's this really cool exercise that Mark Juliana does, which is like, a bar of eighth notes, bar of triplets, bar of 16th notes, bar triplets, back to eighth notes. And it's kind of that progression. And then you do two beats of each, and then you do one beat of each. And you do it at like 30 beats a minute. And you just do quarter notes in the bass drum and hi hat, and you just kind of progress through this thing. And there were days where if I did that exercise for a bit and then varied the tempo, did it at 30 beats a minute, then maybe did it at 60 beats a minute, then maybe fast at 80 beats a minute, and then back down to 30 just to feel that adjustment. I felt better on gigs. I felt more in control of the things I was doing when I played the gig later that night. And I kind of A B'd it. And there were days where I didn't do it and I didn't feel as controlled
Oh yeah, that's
on the
it. That's
gig.
interesting. Yeah.
And then there was another exercise that I can't even remember who I learned this from, but it was it was called like EQ in the drum set. And I've taught this to like younger drummers as well, which like at a time you just play giant whole notes, all four limbs at the same time.
Hmm.
Let all the sound go away. And sometimes you have a flam between your hi-hat and your snare drum, or the bass drum would speak a little too loud. And all you were looking for was not a snare drum, a bass drum, a hi-hat, and a ride cymbal. You were looking for the sound of a drum set. Just a solid, pure snare drum was in the perfect, not too loud, not too soft, the hi-hat the same, and everything spoke at the right time. And like there might be 3 or 4 seconds in between each hit.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. I've heard of, I think it's a Max Roach thing that guys teach, and I've heard it from other
Mm-hmm.
teachers too, just playing quarter notes on all limbs and varying the
Yeah.
dynamics on one limb at a time to kind of get that control. But what you're talking about reminds me a lot of, probably what comes from classical music, right? Where you're not playing a lot of notes sometimes. And when you are sitting for 32 bars of rests and you have a note to
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
play, sometimes
Yeah.
between two hands. It has to be
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, man, I'm like, yeah, so I would do that. The second half of this would be exactly that, which is like quarter notes in all four limbs, and then eighth notes in one limb, crescendo, decrescendo, and be able to control that. Let the ride cymbal get louder, but don't let the bass drum get louder.
Yeah, it
Let the
sounds
bass drum,
it sounds easy, and I think sometimes people don't practice it because it's like, okay, that's quarter notes and eighth notes.
yeah,
So it's easy.
yeah,
It's not easy.
nah. Yeah, I got to a point where if I only had enough time on the kit, I would do just that. I would play whole notes and just like, all right, my body's all working in one, right?
Hmm.
My limbs are speaking in unison. Cool. I'm cohesive now. Then I would do just that EQ exercise and be able to increase one arm and start to be able to control each limb independently. And if that's all I could do, once again, I would play the gig that night and I would feel amazing. I would feel more in control of my ideas, which is obviously like that's just base level. Like now I can go and start to create. I haven't even approached creating yet. I'm just in like a physical and mental state where I'm the most open to being able to actually create with my bandmates.
Yeah, and do you so this kind of leads to something I wanted to ask you about too, and I want to be respectful of your time, so I don't want to keep you a lot longer. But one thing I wanted to ask you about is how you do prepare for gigs. I mean, you just mentioned a little bit some of your routine to ground yourself
Mm-hmm.
and feel comfortable. Um, you play a lot of hard music, especially with extended. And I
Mm-hmm.
know that you write, you're in the, you guys write together, I would assume.
Mm-hmm.
So you know the music pretty intimately, but it's still not easy. So what do you do to prepare for a gig? Now you're up in Boston. Let's say you
Yeah.
guys don't play together again for a couple months. What's your process?
Well, I fly back a week from today to New Orleans to play 4 days of gigs, and one of them is the CD release for the Extended Plus
Oh,
Brad
wow,
record.
cool.
So
Okay.
yeah, we did like a pre-release show. We had the CDs and we did a show in New Orleans a couple months back when I was there. But this is the kind of like now the album is out and we're doing a release show, and then I'm playing a couple gigs, playing with Byron, playing with Trey, playing with the guys with my community of
Oh,
creators.
great.
Um, so you asked that question of how am I going to prepare this music that I haven't played, I haven't practiced. Um, ugh,
I mean, do you feel so
um,
confident in the music and your abilities that you can just kind of go do it at this point with those guys? Or do you kind of try to absorb the music again, figure out the set list, listen to those tunes a lot?
the short answer is yeah. Like I feel incredibly confident in my my ability to play that music and myself as a creator and as an improviser. Even even as a classical musician, man, I rarely like made notes and marked up in the music. It's one of those that like if you're aware during rehearsal and if you're paying attention, like I didn't need anything else. Like I knew what was going to happen because I was there, and I feel like I can close my eyes and like feel what it was like to have done it before. So I don't need notes to remind me. I don't need to read anything to remind me. I can visualize and I can like almost in a sense empathize with my former self having played that music before, of what was hard about it. What did it feel like? What did this feel like? Um, so because of that, it's not that difficult for me to kind of tap back into that space again. You know, if Matt and Oscar and I haven't played together in a while, it takes that before we're all there again. We're back to the last time we played music, and we're back to like, we all know what's going on.
Let's see. I've got just a couple other things I want to ask you about before we wrap up. What are some of your favorite albums that you think are underrated that people haven't checked out? I know you love the Bad Plus. Are there
Yeah.
other genres or albums from other genres or modern abstract music that?
Um. Funny enough, we talk about like swing and how much I didn't really check out um, like bebop and everything. One of my favorite albums of all time is the Kenny Barron Trio, live at Bradley's. I love that music. That was probably the record that actually made me fall in love with like swinging and like bebop and post bop. And then I very fortunately had the opportunity to tell Kenny Barron that when he played at the Regatta Bar. I told them how much that record means to me, and that like that's a record that whether I'm thinking about jazz or if I'm listening to a bunch of rock music or a bunch of hip hop, I can put that record on and it always feels right. Everything about that record, no matter where I'm at in my life, that record feels like the thing that I needed to listen to right then. If I put it on right now, it'd feel the same way. It's like, yeah, of course, this is the record that I need to listen to. I think about that as a creator as well, that like that's what I want people to think when they listen to music that I'm a part of. That like this is the thing I needed to listen to right now.
So where can people follow you and find out more about you, what projects you're up to, your teaching, what you're doing up there in Boston?
There's really only one place, man. It's my website.
Okay.
I got off of social media a few years ago. I say my website. I have a YouTube channel that if I have any videos that I'm a part of, I either post it there or I link it there. But then that all gets kind of reposted on my website, and that's really the only place. I guess I got rid of Facebook. I got rid of Instagram. I don't know what TikTok is yet. I got off all that, and I haven't really looked back.
I'll make sure to link to your website and to your YouTube for sure, and probably other videos. That video of you guys at Monks, I think I might have mentioned already.
Oh yeah,
Right, that's a good one. Shot really well.
yeah.
Playing is great.
The guy Colin that runs Monks over in Austin, Texas, he's a homie. He's down for the cause.
Yeah, you
He's
can
always,
tell. You can tell.
yeah.
All right, Brad. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Dude, Craig, thank you, man. Like I said, I think I reached out to you. We met at that gig back in 2017 and never talked really again. And then I was looking for press material for my new website. And I Googled my name, and you had written an article about me shortly after that I didn't know about. And I was so incredibly thankful and so incredibly flattered, because you don't know this, but at that time I was like struggling to write, and I was struggling to find like a new way. And I thought maybe I didn't have anything else to say, which is a very naive thing for someone at that age, even in my 20s. But you came along and wrote some very flattering things about me, and listened and paid attention to that music. And it kind of reinvigorated me at that time that I really needed it. And I feel similarly about this interview. You know, I just moved to a new city and trying to figure it out. And in New Orleans, people know me and I have a reputation. And here, no one knows me and I don't have that reputation yet. So it feels very daunting. But the fact that you've reached out again at a very interesting time of my life I'm very appreciative. I really am.
Well, thank you. I'm really glad to hear that. And I hope this just amplifies you in the drumming community, because I think you're such a unique talent. And I think more people need to hear you.
Thanks, Craig. Seriously, man, I appreciate it. I can't thank you enough. And I hope we get a chance to see each other in person soon.
Oh, well. Yeah. Same.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, Brad. Well, you take care. Have fun in New Orleans in the next couple weeks.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll talk to you again.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks again, Craig.
All right. Yeah. All right. Thanks for listening. If you like the show, please subscribe on your platform of choice and share it with a friend. You can find the podcast at practicingdrummer.com or on Facebook and Instagram as Practicing Drummer. Until next time, happy practicing.